Greetings in the name of Christ and welcome to Spruce Pine United Methodist Church's online connection for Sunday, September 3rd, 2023. We're so glad you are connecting with us today. So this is week 10 of our 1 year through the Bible journey. And today we're talking about paying attention to the details of life and paying attention to the important relationships that we have in our lives. So if you would, get ready for worship, center yourself, prepare your space, and may the peace of Christ be with you now. This is week 10 of our B1 Bible in 1 year journey. Now, the last 2 weeks have included a lot of difficult readings. As we've noted, the books of Joshua and Judges are some of the harshest books we'll encounter in the Bible. And as we finished the book of Judges this week, it ends with more violence, evil, and destruction. At this point in God's story, we seem so far away from the Garden of Eden, where humans and God lived in harmony with one another. How can we hear God's distant voice calling all of creation supremely good? Over the past few weeks, we've read some stories that reveal how we humans do get things right. But we've read a lot of stories highlighting how we miss the mark and get things horribly wrong. We've seen a steady decline in people's integrity and behavior. We see how people repeatedly push away from the state of interdependence God has created us to live in, as we allow pride and ego to drive our desire for independence. And we've read about the fallout caused by our trying to define good and evil on our own without considering God or others. And as we move from the book of Judges into the books of 1st and 2nd Samuel, we read about the state of the people of Israel, that each person did what they thought was right. Again, humans trying to define good and evil on their own. And we end Judges with a civil war where there's fighting within the tribes of Israel. The very people who God chose to bless all the families of the earth through are at war with themselves. Then as we begin reading in Samuel, we learn of Samuel's call as a prophet. And we also learn of the people's desire to have a king, just like all the other nations that surround them. And so this pattern of drawing near to God and pushing away from God continues. It seems like this whole story so far has been this ebb and flow in our relationship with God. In the words of one of our Bible study participants, are we humans ever going to get things right? Even in our reading in Samuel, we still don't know if humans are going to get things right. God allows Samuel to anoint a king for the Israelites, but it's like God is saying, I'll give you what you want, but you really don't know what you're asking for. Because oftentimes what we want isn't always best for us. So in essence, Samuel reads like a continuation of Judges, as the people of Israel transition from military leaders, the judges, to monarchies ruled by kings. In fact, the section of the Bible from Deuteronomy to 1st and 2nd Kings captures this particular time period in the Israelites' history, the time of transition from wanderers to settlers, from temporary leaders to permanent leaders. So much of this section will sound similar. So yay, we get to keep reading about this up and down, ebb and flow pattern of the people do good, the people don't do good, the king does good, the king doesn't do good, for several more weeks. But not so fast. And don't despair, because tucked in the midst of Israel's transitional history comes a blip of hope, a story that comes at just the right time and helps restore our faith in humanity, that we really can get things right every now and then. Ruth's story comes when we need a shot of hope. It's a beautiful story of love, inclusion, hope, and the good that can happen when we pay attention to people and the important relationships in our lives. So let's look at our scripture focus for this week. It comes from the book of Ruth, chapter 1, verses 1 through 18. During the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. A man with his wife and 2 sons went from Bethlehem of Judah to dwell in the territory of Moab. The name of that man was Elimelech. The name of his wife was Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They entered the territory of Moab and settled there. But Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died. Then only she was left along with her 2 sons. They took wives for themselves, Moabite women. The name of the first was Orpah, and the name of the second was Ruth. And they lived there for about 10 years. But both of the sons, Mahlon and Chilion, also died. Only the woman was left without her 2 children and without her husband. Then she arose along with her daughters-in-law to return from the field of Moab, because while in the territory of Moab, she had heard that the Lord had paid attention to his people by providing food for them. She left the place where she had been, and her 2 daughters-in-law went with her. They went along the road to return to the land of Judah. Naomi said to her daughters-in-law, "Go, turn back, each of you, to the household of your mother. May the Lord deal faithfully with you, just as you have done with the dead and with me. May the Lord provide for you so that you may find security, each woman in the household of her husband." Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. But they replied to her, "No, instead we will return with you to your people." Naomi replied, "Turn back, my daughters. Why would you go with me? Will there again be sons in my womb that they would be husbands for you? Turn back, my daughters. Go, I am too old for a husband. If I were to say that I have hope, even if I had a husband tonight, and even more, if I were to bear sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you refrain from having a husband? No, my daughters, this is more bitter for me than for you. since the Lord's will has come out against me." Then they lifted up their voices and wept again. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth stayed with her. Naomi said, "Look, your sister-in-law is returning to her people and to her gods. Turn back after your sister-in-law." But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to abandon you, to turn back from following after you. Wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do this to me, and more so, if even death separates me from you." When Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped speaking to her about it. This is the word of God, a gift for all people. Thanks be to God. Wow, so much happens in the opening section of this amazing story. We're introduced to Naomi, an Israelite, her husband Elimelech, and their 2 sons. They face a famine and move from their home in Bethlehem to Moab, which is just across the Jordan River on the other side of the Promised Land. Now, her sons marry Moabite women, which is a no-no for the people of Israel. And we see in just the first 5 verses of this story, everything changes in Naomi's world. Her husband and both her sons die. And this leaves Naomi and her 2 daughters-in-law to fend for themselves. And now they face not only grief, but grief combined with fear, because these women have lost their social and economic safety nets. If the story ended after these tragic events, it surely would have been the end for Naomi. No hope for a secure future. Kind of like it is for so many people today. Those who are T-boned by an unexpected setback that sends them into a vortex of difficulties that they just can't seem to escape from. But even before we get to Ruth and her story, we see the first glimmer of hope in this section of God's story that has been dark and challenging. In the midst of her own grief and pain, Naomi still pays attention to the needs of others. And she realizes that her daughters-in-law are also grieving. They've lost their husbands, and they're young widows. So who's going to take care of them? United Methodist pastor Magray de Vega imagines Naomi choking back her own tears in order to address the tears of her 2 young daughters-in-law. She garners her strength and lets them know that all will be okay. And she lets them know that she will be okay without them. She urges her 2 daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth, to go back to their homeland of Moab. Go home. You're young. Get married again so that you can have a secure future. Don't worry about me. I'll be fine. And what a tough decision this is for both Orpah and Ruth. And they're heartbroken at the loss of their husbands. And they're also distraught because their mother-in-law lost her husband and 2 sons. Orpah decides to leave and go back to Moab. And it's not that we can blame her. In the midst of her grief and trying to figure out what to do next, her decision is less about leaving Naomi behind and more about turning towards healing and hopefulness. Now, Ruth makes a different decision. In the midst of her pain and grief, she too pays attention to the needs of others. And she says some of the most beautiful words found in the Bible. Wherever you go, I will go. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Wow. Talk about the definition of compassion and grace. I'm not going anywhere. I will be with you always, through the bad and through the good. Ruth is a prime example of John Wesley's practical theology, putting our faith into action, practicing what we preach. Ruth knows that life is tough for them at the moment. And she also knows it's going to get tougher, especially going to Judah, where she would not just be a foreigner or outsider, she would be a hated foreigner or outsider. Because Ruth is from Moab, which, as we noted earlier, is just on the other side of the Jordan River, outside of the Promised Land. It was the last stop for the people of Israel before crossing the river into a new chapter in their history. And they didn't get a stellar response from the Moabites as they were trying to pass through. It also turns out that some of the Israelites stayed in Moab. They didn't cross over because they were content with the land. So the animosity between Israel and Moab goes back a long time. But Ruth, who's been paying attention to the important relationships in her life, sticks with her commitments she's made, her decisions toward Naomi, the Israelites, and to God. Ruth put her faith into action, and she kept going even though life was hard, because that's what people who pay attention to others do. Ruth was persistent. She pushed through the hard times. And that's a big part of our faith. There's an expression that says, tough times don't last, but tough people do. And Ruth is a great example of this. She reminds us that paying attention to the details of life and paying attention and remaining faithful to the important relationships we have is what will get us through life, especially in tough times. Ruth's story is one of redemption on many levels because it's not just Ruth who gets redeemed as an outsider in this story. First, there's Naomi. She symbolizes the people of Israel and all of humanity. Her attitudes and actions parallel those of the people of Israel and, again, humanity in general. And they face challenges, difficulties, and struggles. And so this story is about Naomi's, the people of Israel's, and our redemption. Ruth's story also reminds us that God tends to surprise us. And if we're not careful, we'll miss God. And we'll miss God working through people. Because more often than not, God works through people we least expect. We oftentimes don't expect an outsider like Ruth to be a conduit of God's redemption in the world. And it's important to note that redemption is based on grace, not merit. We don't earn grace or find favor with God because we're insiders or churchgoers or good people. God gives us grace because of who God is. And grace will come in the ways God offers, not necessarily in the ways we want or expect. God often surprises us by what He does, who He uses, and how and where He shows up. But as we end the books of Joshua and Judges, it sure seems that up to this point that obedience involves violence and power, and it looks like living in community involves lies and deception. So Ruth's story comes at the perfect moment. It reminds us of what it means to live by allowing God's character and integrity to guide our decisions and actions. Ruth reminds us about faithfulness, redemption, deliverance, and all the good that can come from paying attention to others. Ruth's story reveals some of the best parts of God's story. Care for those who are poor, oppressed, marginalized, and considered others or outsiders. Love for all people, especially those who are down and out and need a little extra help to move them from surviving to thriving. And we need to hold on to these godly characteristics in our lives because these characteristics help us pay attention to the details in life. And they help us adore, cherish, and truly appreciate the relationships we have in our lives. We are created for interdependence with God, each other, and all of creation. And it's great to talk about Ruth's story in the midst of a very difficult portion of the Bible. Because Ruth's story is about redemption and new life. And Ruth's story points us to Jesus. At our in-person service, we will have the honor and privilege of joining with creation outside and each other as we share in communion. We will remember Jesus' life, ministry, death, resurrection, and ascension. We'll come to his table as his guests for redemption and new life. So may we pay attention to God and others. May we remember and celebrate the times we humans do get things right. May we continue to help bring about God's kingdom on earth as it is in heaven for the sake of God's good name and God's promise to bless all the families of the earth. Amen. Thank you for connecting with us today here at Spruce Pine United Methodist Church's online connection. We're glad that you connected with us. We hope you got a real blessing from being with us. And if you have a need, please reach out to the church. We would love to help you as much as we can. You can reach us in person, by phone, email, or social media. For those of you who are regular supporters of the mission and ministry of our church, thank you, because we are interdependent upon God and each other. We're a team in mission and ministry. So we do have 4 ways in which you can financially support the mission of the church. First is here at our 9 o'clock and 11 o'clock in-person services. Don't forget that this Sunday is only 1 at 11 because we're going to be outside. But also, if you live locally and you want to drop off your donation, you can stop by the church during normal office hours of Monday through Thursday, 9 to 2. You can mail your contribution to the church at 11090 Highway 226 South in Spruce Pine, North Carolina, 28777. Or if you live in the digital world, you can go to our website, sprucepineumc.org, then click the Give and Donate Now tabs, and make sure you're signed into your account. It's a quick, easy, safe, and secure website. And so this week we've got this beautiful glimpse in the midst of some darkness in God's story, some heaviness in God's story. But we got a glimpse again of redemption and the beauty of creation that God has in mind for us. So I think our challenge this week is how can we hold on to these godly characteristics and invite people into God's story and hold on to the redemption in the midst of hard times. Now, don't forget our weekly announcements are in a separate video this week, so look for them. And also, we hope that you have a beautiful week, a blessed week. Be blessings to others. Seek the ways in which we can help bless all the families of the earth to help fulfill God's promise. So have a great week, and we hope to see you next time on our online connection.